In this segment, we're going to delve into another big idea of effective feedback. The first big idea we looked at was about how the focus of effective feedback practice is not on the feedback comments alone, but on students knowing what's good performance, feeding up, how their current performance relates to good performance, feeding back, and how to act to close the gap between their current performance and good performance, feeding forward. The big idea of effective feedback could be described as a relational level of understanding in solo terms. At a pre-structural level, someone without a clear understanding of effective feedback may say something like, feedback is about giving comments. At a unistructural level, they may have single ideas about feedback, for example, that feedback should be timely. At the relational level, a person with that level of understanding begins to link ideas together. For example, feedback practice is about helping students find the gap and fix the learning gaps. So multi-structural level will be some kind of understanding between unistructural and relational, and it is demonstrated by a number of ideas, though may not be well connected. For example, feedback should be actionable so that students can add on feedback and hopefully improve. At the extended abstract level, the understanding of feedback situates feedback practice in a larger backdrop. For example, against sustainable learning, student feedback literacy, and how assessment ability is the 21st century skills. Some ideas we will explore at the final session. Here we want to talk about a number of implications we can draw from a more relational understanding of feedback, or AFL. We call this AFL triangle, which describes minimal conditions for AFL to succeed in the classroom, which includes students' understanding of standards, clear task design, and sound feedback practices. Another relation that we should consider is how teachers and students should relate to each other in terms of achievement. When we think about the word assessment or achievement, we tend to think about this scene of rows of students taking an exam, and the teacher as the invigilator, ensuring that there is fairness during the conduct of the exam. But in its original intent, AFL comes from the root word assidia, which means to sit beside. So assessment should connote this scene of a teacher sitting beside a student as a guide by the side rather than a sage on the stage. So how should then teachers and students relate to one another in terms of how they understand and move towards achievement is quite key in helping us to see the affordances of feedback and assessment for learning. I'd like to share with you the next video to illustrate how teachers and students should relate to each other in terms of achievement.
Could I get someone to read the last paragraph?
Me!
Victor, let's give someone else a chance today, shall we?
There is going to be a skit performance, and we need a narrator. Who would like to do it?
Good morning.
Victor, would you like to introduce the story? So who can give me an example? Breathe in, and then I want you to breathe out through your mouth. Okay, so let's go again. 1. Okay, go something like big bad wolf.
The big bad wolf. All the better to eat you up. A woodsman was walking past by Grandma's house. He saw the big bad wolf asleep.
From the video, we can see a few key ideas about how teachers and students should relate to one another in terms of achievement. In the video, we saw how Victor, from his first assessment, didn't do quite well. He lost his confidence and self-esteem as a result. The teacher sat beside him, coached him, encouraged him, and gave him lots of feedback. And when given a second chance in a second assessment, Victor mustered his courage and he gave it a go. While we don't know the outcome, but we can tell from this video that Victor has appreciated feedback. He has put aside his negative emotion and he's able to muster courage to try again. Which leads us to the second big idea of effective feedback. The focus of effective feedback is not so much on the design of tasks alone, but also on how teachers and students relate to each other in terms of achievement in order to develop student feedback literacy, which is an important 21st century skill. Colors and Bold coined the term student feedback literacy in their very recent paper in 2018, whereby they describe students with well-developed feedback literacy being able to do 3 things. Appreciate their active role in the feedback process. They are able to make sound judgment about their work, and they're able to manage their effect or emotions in positive ways. And they posit that when students have all these 3 attributes, in greater likelihood, they are able to have the potential to take the necessary actions upon feedback. In their paper, Colors and Bold also gave a list of indicators that could show evidence of students' ability to appreciate feedback, make judgment, manage effect, and take action. I invite you to go to this link to indicate where your students are in these couple of areas. You can pause the video here to do so. Did the results of the survey surprise you in any way? I invite you to do this survey with teachers in your department or school, as it can highlight certain areas of priority that you can work on in developing your students' feedback literacy. In these 3 indicators of students' ability to manage effect, it seems to show an increasing level of proficiency, where students start off with avoiding being defensive, and at the highest level of proficiency, they look towards continuous improvement, they seek external feedback from others, and they combine that with their own reflection to make sense of the feedback. In terms of appreciating feedback, I like to highlight how we can tap technology to enable students to assess, store, and revisit feedback at important junctures of their learning. At present, there are many affordances to tap technology-enabled feedback. We are no longer limited to written feedback that's done on paper or verbal feedback that's done face-to-face. I invite you to go to this link to see an example of feedback that's given with screencast technology. Here you see an example of the teacher annotating and giving comments to the student's work. The student will get a video clipping of this and work on the comments that is received. I think minimally, screencast technology enables feedback to do two things. It forces the student to pay attention to the teacher's comments, and secondly, it enables the student to revisit feedback that's given for subsequent work. So pause the video to access this link. I hope you had a go at using either Zoom or Google Meet in giving feedback using screencast technology. Here we shall continue with looking at making judgment as part of student feedback literacy. And of the three indicators here, it is quite apparent that opportunities for peer feedback discussions and self-assessment work are quite key in giving students the opportunity to hone their ability to make informed judgment and sound judgment of their work. Finally, we have these three indicators of students' ability to take action. And there seems to be an increasing level of proficiency, starting with their awareness of having to take action in response to feedback, to eventually developing a wide repertoire of strategies for acting appropriately on feedback. So they are not limited to just copying teachers' corrections or comments on their revised work, but they're able to think about their own ideas, to even question the feedback that's given and offer their own points of view. What then is the implication on teacher feedback if the central focus of feedback practice is to develop student feedback literacy? I argue that we need to go beyond the idea that feedback is a one-way, once-off communication to students. If we desire to develop student feedback literacy, then feedback must be constructed in appropriate ways, and students should have an opportunity to negotiate the meaning of comments with us, to ask questions, and to make sense of feedback in their own terms. So this is the second big idea of effective feedback that we want to land on today, that the focus of effective feedback practice is not on the feedback design alone, but how teachers and students relate to each other in terms of achievement to develop student feedback literacy. I'm going to conclude this segment by inviting you to look at some examples of evidence-based feedback practice drawn from the work we have done in a couple of schools. This is an example of a P3 science worksheet. I invite you to look at the students' work and give a suggestion on what feedback might be useful to move his or her learning forward. Do pause the video to write down your comments, and you get the benefit of being able to compare with the teacher's actual practice later. So pause the video here. So what the teacher did was this. He gave a checklist with this set of script to help students remember the success criteria of answering such comparison questions. First, the student needs to compare the animals based on the same characteristics. Next, he needs to compare both animals. Thirdly, use linking words and to present a complete answer. So the teacher's actions remind us that feedback is not just about what is written by the teachers to the student. What's more important is to identify what students need to learn so that they can answer the questions meaningfully and over time independently. Now I invite you to look at other artifacts and consider what advice you would offer the teachers to address students' learning needs. Pause the video here. You can find the teacher's actual practice in this link. but don't forget to write down your own ideas before doing so. To conclude, I'd like to help you to consolidate some of the ideas that you might have in looking at actual artifacts that we have put up from the work that we've done in schools. From the case studies from the work we did during secondary school, we were able to notice a number of feedback principles at work in at least the English and the math classrooms. In both cases, the teachers went about doing at least 3 things in interpreting and acting on evidence of students' work. Firstly, they looked at the complex tasks and they broke it down for students. Secondly, they went to address conceptual challenges students had before addressing their task demands. And finally, in making transfer visible, they were cognizant in helping students understand and be able to internalize process skills that will help them to do similar tasks in the future. From the case studies from the work we did in Choa Chu Kang Primary School, we also saw feedback principles at work in the different classrooms. In the mother tongue classrooms, there were at least 3 principles that the teachers were observing. Firstly, they practiced positive feedback in their feedback comments. Secondly, they downsized the improvement that's required for individual students. And thirdly, they help students practice more independence so that they work themselves out of the job. And that is quite similar to what the secondary school teachers were doing in thinking about making transfer visible. You can go to this link to read about how the teachers and the middle leaders led assessment change in the 2 schools. So in conclusion, I'd like to reiterate the focus of effective feedback practice. It's not on the design itself, but on how teachers and students relate to each other in terms of achievement to develop student feedback literacy. And in that regard, we are keen to help students appreciate feedback, make judgment, and manage effect.